the sun-drenched expanse of California, where ambition and innovation often shape destinies, a man cultivated a peculiar kind of fame. His name echoed through local chatter, whispered with a mix of awe and hunger. He was a chef, a culinary artisan, who ran a modest roadside burger stand, a seemingly unassuming fixture against the backdrop of highways and endless skies. His burgers, known for their unique flavor and surprising succulence, quickly garnered a loyal following. Customers lined up, drawn by the irresistible aroma and the promise of a meal unlike any other. He was a local legend, his humble establishment a beacon for those seeking an extraordinary bite. The stand thrived, its popularity soaring, fueled by the chef's enigmatic charm and the undeniable appeal of his signature blend. Life, for a time, seemed perfectly crafted for him. His days were a rhythm of sizzling patties and satisfied patrons, his nights filled with the quiet contentment of a successful venture. Yet, beneath this veneer of culinary triumph, a monstrous secret festered. It was a secret known only to two, a truth too grotesque to ever fully comprehend. One day the delicate balance shattered. The other person privy to this unspeakable reality, his wife, found herself at a precipice. The weight of the truth became unbearable, the silent complicity a torment. She confronted him, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury, threatening to tear down the very empire he had so meticulously constructed. She vowed to expose the horrifying truth behind his special meat, to rip open the veil of deception and reveal the unspeakable ingredient that truly set his burgers apart. Her words hung in the air, a death knell to his carefully constructed world. For years, the horrifying reality of his ingredients remained concealed, a dark shadow lurking within the confines of his kitchen. It began subtly, an insidious curiosity twisting into a grotesque obsession. He had experimented, quietly at first, driven by a perverse desire for the ultimate flavor, the unparalleled texture. Then he introduced it, little by little, into his ground beef, confident that no one would discern the subtle shift. He learned to mask it, to blend it, to make the unspeakable palatable. Flashbacks, fleeting and disturbing, revealed the origins of his methods, the meticulous process of integration. He sourced his grim additions from the shadows, acquiring them under the cloak of night, transforming them into a product he could then brazenly sell to an unsuspecting public. His customers, innocent in their hunger, savored each bite, unknowingly participating in a macabre feast. His wife, a witness to the gradual descent into depravity, had initially been too terrified to speak. But the secret, a constant companion in their shared life, had finally become too heavy. She discovered the full extent of his depravity, piecing together the grisly truth from subtle clues, from the lingering scent of something undeniably wrong, from the dark stains that would not wash away. She saw the true nature of his special meat, and the realization ripped through her, leaving her reeling. The confrontation was inevitable, a clash of conscience against monstrous ambition. She laid out her discovery, her accusations sharp and unwavering, her voice filled with a desperate plea for him to stop. Her words were not just a threat. They were an ultimatum, a direct challenge to the twisted foundation of his success. The secret was out, at least to her, and now it threatened to consume everything. The confrontation escalated, the air in their quiet home kitchen thick with a tension that was almost palpable. Her words, sharp and accusatory, sliced through the deceptive calm he had meticulously maintained. His wife, her face contorted with a mix of horror and defiance, stood resolute in her intention to expose him. For him, the stakes were impossibly high. Exposure meant not only the ruin of his burgeoning business, the collapse of his carefully constructed culinary empire, but also the brutal unveiling of his true, monstrous nature to a world that adored his burgers. It meant the complete destruction of his life, his reputation, his very existence as he knew it. The thought of it, the horrifying specter of public condemnation and legal repercussions, ignited a cold, desperate fury within him. The argument, initially a clash of wills and hushed, venomous accusations, swiftly devolved into something far more primal and terrifying. His calm facade cracked, revealing the raw, dangerous desperation beneath. He saw her not as his wife, the woman he had shared his life with, but as an insurmountable obstacle, a direct threat to his freedom and his dark enterprise. The kitchen, once a place of creation and culinary artistry, transformed into a stage for a horrific drama. A desperate struggle ensued, a violent dance of survival and suppression. The familiar tools of his trade, the very implements he used to craft his popular burgers, became instruments of destruction. A knife, sharpened to a razor's edge for precise butchery, was seized in a moment of frantic impulse. A heavy, blunt object, perhaps a rolling pin or a cast-iron pan, lay close at hand, an undeniable temptation for a mind pushed to the brink. The sounds of the struggle were muffled, contained within the walls of their home, unheard by the unsuspecting world outside. There were shouts, desperate pleas, and the sickening thud of impact. The reenactment, stark and chilling, laid bare the brutality of the act. We see the flash of a blade, the desperate lunge, the final, terrifying moments as life ebbed away from her. She fought, for her life, for her truth, but her efforts were ultimately futile against the cold, calculated desperation of a man determined to protect his monstrous secret at any cost. Her body, once vibrant and alive, lay still amidst the scattered remnants of a life brutally extinguished. The act was swift, merciless, and utterly final. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by his ragged breathing and the horrifying realization of what he had done. He had killed his wife, the one person who knew his darkest secret, the one person who could have brought his gruesome empire crashing down. The kitchen, now a scene of unspeakable horror, bore witness to the ultimate act of betrayal and self-preservation. He stood over her, the weight of his actions settling upon him, not with remorse, but with a chilling, pragmatic resolve to continue his monstrous deception. The deed was done. The terrifying silence that followed the brutal act in their home kitchen was quickly broken by the chef's frantic thoughts, a chilling internal monologue of self-preservation and calculated deception. There was no time for remorse, no space for regret. Only the cold, hard reality of the situation and the immediate, overwhelming need to eliminate all traces of his heinous crime. The body of his wife, the one person who held the key to his undoing, lay still, a stark reminder of the lengths to which he would go to protect his grotesque secret. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that discovery meant the end of everything he had built, and worse, the exposure of his true, horrifying nature. His mind, accustomed to the methodical precision of butchery, swiftly shifted gears from murder to a macabre form of damage control. The basement, a place typically reserved for storage and the less glamorous aspects of food preparation, became his grim workshop. There, in the dim, cool confines, he embarked upon the unspeakable task of dismemberment. The tools he used were familiar, extensions of his professional life, but now repurposed for an act of unimaginable horror. Knives, saws, and cleavers, usually employed to break down animal carcasses for his popular burgers, were now applied with chilling efficiency to the remains of his own wife. Each cut was deliberate, precise, driven by a perverse logic. To make her disappear, to render her unidentifiable, to transform her into something he could easily dispose of, or, even more horrifyingly, incorporate into his business. The air in the basement grew thick with the metallic scent of blood and the pervasive chill of death. Yet he worked with a disturbing calm, his focus unwavering. Every action was a step in his meticulously planned cover-up. He wrapped the dismembered remains, not in the reverence of burial shrouds, but in industrial-grade plastic sheeting and disposal containers, the kind he typically used for food waste or discarded ingredients. These containers, usually filled with the mundane detritus of a busy kitchen, now held the unspeakable. His twisted logic, a product of his depraved mind, dictated that no one could ever tell the difference. He had perfected the art of blending, of masking, of transforming the unspeakable into something seemingly ordinary, even delicious. The thought was nauseating, yet he embraced it with a terrifying resolve. The timing of his wife's disappearance, and his subsequent actions, was no mere coincidence. It was payday weekend, a time when his roadside burger stand experienced its peak in customer traffic. The demand for his special burgers would be at an all-time high, creating the perfect opportunity for him to seamlessly integrate the most recent and most heinous of his ingredients. The volume of sales, the sheer number of patties he would be preparing, offered an ideal cover for the inclusion of her flesh. He envisioned the unsuspecting throngs of hungry customers, eagerly lining up for their favorite meal, completely oblivious to the horrific truth contained within each bite. The thought of this ultimate deception, the final insult to his victim and the ultimate violation of his customer's trust, filled him with a perverse sense of power. He continued to sell, outwardly composed, his face a mask of normalcy, even as the unspeakable act weighed heavily on his conscience, or perhaps, in his case, simply solidified his resolve. The rhythmic sizzle of meat on the grill, the comforting aroma of cooking burgers, the cheerful chatter of satisfied customers, all served as a macabre backdrop to his ongoing crime. The narrative voice, detached and chilling, underscored the horrifying depths of his depravity. No one could tell the difference. This phrase echoed the chilling truth of his monstrous success. He had, through years of practice and a complete abandonment of human morality, refined his horrific craft to such an extent that his victims, once incorporated, became indistinguishable from the beef. The sheer audacity of his actions, the cold calculation involved in turning his own wife into a component of his business, painted a truly disturbing portrait of a mind completely devoid of empathy and consumed by a terrifying, self-serving pathology. The successful continuation of his business, even in the immediate aftermath of such a brutal crime, served as a testament to his chilling effectiveness as a killer and a master of disguise. The days following the murder settled into a disturbingly familiar rhythm for the chef. He continued to operate his burger stand with an unsettling composure, the scent of sizzling meat and fried onions masking the far more sinister aroma that surely permeated his very being. Outwardly, he maintained the facade of a hard-working entrepreneur, perhaps a little more subdued than usual, but certainly not a man who had just brutally murdered and dismembered his wife. He offered vague explanations for her absence, a sudden trip to visit ailing relatives, an unexpected need for a personal retreat, explanations that, on their own, might have seemed plausible enough. However, the wife's disappearance, sudden and without a proper farewell, began to chip away at the illusion. She had been a familiar face around the stand, a quiet but consistent presence in the community. Neighbors, accustomed to her daily routines and friendly greetings, quickly noticed her prolonged absence. Their casual inquiries to the chef were met with his practiced, evasive answers, but these explanations often felt hollow, lacking the detail and conviction one might expect from a spouse. A sense of unease began to ripple through the close-knit community. Whispers started quietly, like rustling leaves in a gentle breeze, then grew louder, turning into murmurs of concern. "Have you seen her? It's not like her to just leave without a word. He seems different." These questions, initially benign, slowly morphed into something more pointed, more suspicious. The authorities, particularly the local police, were eventually alerted to the wife's sudden vanishing act. It wasn't an immediate, dramatic intervention, but rather a gradual escalation of concern. A concerned neighbor, perhaps an elderly woman who had shared daily pleasantries with the missing wife, finally decided to act on her gut feeling. A relative, unable to reach her by phone for days, grew increasingly worried. These individual concerns coalesced into a formal missing person report. Once the report was filed, the standard procedures began. Uniformed officers conducted preliminary interviews, starting, of course, with the chef himself. His demeanor during these initial conversations was meticulously controlled. He presented himself as a worried husband, offering what little information he had, reiterating his fabricated story about her sudden departure. But seasoned investigators possess a finely tuned intuition, a sixth sense for inconsistencies and evasions. They observed the subtle shifts in his eyes, the slight hesitation before answering certain questions, the overly rehearsed nature of his responses. The initial interviews, intended to gather information, instead served to deepen their nascent suspicions. The investigation quietly intensified. Detectives began scrutinizing his timeline, cross-referencing his statements with what little they knew of the wife's last known activities. They talked to other neighbors, to regular customers at the burger stand, to anyone who might have had contact with the wife in the days leading up to her disappearance. The inconsistencies began to pile up like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Her friends mentioned her excitement about upcoming plans, making her sudden and unexplained departure seem increasingly out of character. No one had received a farewell call or message. There were no packed bags, no logical reason for her to simply vanish without a trace. Then, a more disturbing element emerged. Investigators, during a routine visit to the chef's property as part of the missing person inquiry, noticed subtle but unsettling details. The kitchen, despite being a professional workspace, had a cleanliness that felt almost too sterile, an unnatural lack of the usual everyday clutter one expects in a lived-in space. A faint, almost imperceptible odor lingered in the air, something sharp and chemical, yet with an underlying metallic tang that defied easy identification. While nothing immediately pointed to a crime, these small anomalies pricked at the investigators' instincts. They took note of unusual disposal containers, industrial-sized bins that seemed out of place for a small roadside burger stand, and noted the curious lack of any personal items belonging to the wife, as if she had been meticulously erased from the premises. The ground began to shift beneath the chef's feet, slowly but inexorably, as the quiet whispers of suspicion started to solidify into concrete investigative leads. The clock was ticking, not just for the chef, but for the truth to finally emerge from the shadows. The initial suspicions, once subtle whispers, now solidified into a tangible theory in the minds of the lead investigators. The discrepancies in the chef's story, the unusual cleanliness of the property, and the complete, inexplicable vanishing act of his wife all pointed towards a conclusion far darker than a simple missing person case. A court order was swiftly obtained, granting the police the authority to conduct a more thorough search of the chef's property and, critically, his popular burger stand. The moment of truth had arrived, and the once bustling roadside establishment was about to reveal its grim secrets. The raid was executed with precision and a quiet determination. Swathes of police vehicles descended upon the seemingly innocuous stand, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the surrounding area. Forensic teams, dressed in sterile protective gear, moved methodically through every inch of the premises. Their experienced eyes, trained to spot the minutest irregularities, quickly began to uncover deeply disturbing evidence. It started in the kitchen, the very heart of the chef's operation. Beneath the sparkling clean surfaces and the well-maintained equipment, the police discovered traces of blood, not immediately visible to the naked eye but illuminating starkly under specialized UV lights. These weren't mere cooking accidents. The patterns and locations suggested something far more violent had transpired. As they delved deeper, the true horror began to unfurl. In a secluded corner, partially obscured and seemingly innocuous, they found unusual disposal containers. These weren't your typical restaurant-grade bins. They were robust, tightly sealed, and far too large for standard kitchen waste. A chilling premonition gnawed at the investigators as they carefully opened the containers. Inside, amidst layers of what appeared to be industrial-grade cleaning chemicals and deodorizers, they discovered something that turned their stomachs and confirmed their darkest fears: human remains. The discovery was a grotesque confirmation of the wife's fate and the chef's monstrous acts. The search continued, extending into the basement, a space the chef had so recently used for his unspeakable acts. Here, the evidence mounted rapidly, painting a vivid and horrifying picture of his depravity. They found a collection of grisly tools: large, heavy-duty saws, sharp cleavers, and industrial grinders, all meticulously cleaned but still bearing telltale residues that forensic analysis would later confirm. These weren't the standard tools of a burger chef. They were instruments designed for dismemberment, for reducing a body to unrecognizable components. The air in the basement itself seemed to carry the faint, lingering scent of decomposition, despite the chef's desperate attempts at chemical concealment. Back at the lab, the forensic scientists worked tirelessly. The toxicology tests performed on the fragmented remains of the wife yielded a definitive, chilling result. She had been murdered. The presence of specific substances, likely sedatives or incapacitants, indicated she had been subdued before her death, matching the calculated, cold-blooded nature of the crime. Furthermore, advanced DNA analysis of the various human remains found on the property linked them unequivocally to the missing wife. But the investigation yielded an even more horrifying revelation. Further testing and comparisons of other unidentified human tissues discovered in the disposal containers and even subtly mixed within some of the food preparation areas revealed a chilling match. The DNA also corresponded to other missing persons cases, individuals who had vanished without a trace in the region over the past several years. This revelation confirmed the investigators' dawning horror. The chef was not merely a murderer, but a serial killer, and his successful burger stand had been the gruesome means to dispose of his victims, selling their very essence to an unwitting public. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly disparate, now fit together with terrifying precision, forming a complete and utterly repulsive picture of the California killer chef. The overwhelming weight of the evidence, meticulously collected and presented by the unyielding investigators, finally crushed the chef's carefully constructed facade. Confronted with irrefutable proof, the DNA matches, the grisly tools, the damning discovery of human remains on his property, his composure fractured. The carefully cultivated image of the charming, culinary artisan crumbled, revealing the terrified, cornered monster beneath. The bravado, the practiced nonchalance, and the flimsy explanations evaporated into thin air. In that interrogation room, under the harsh glare of the lights, with his dark world collapsing around him, he finally broke. The confession, when it came, was a chilling descent into the mind of a depraved individual. He spoke initially in hushed, fragmented sentences, then with a disturbing clarity of how he had meticulously murdered his wife. He recounted the argument, the desperate struggle, and the final, fatal blow, driven by the absolute terror that she would expose his unspeakable secret. The fear of revelation, he explained, was a consuming fire, a force more powerful than any moral compass, any shred of humanity he might have once possessed. He detailed, with a horrifying detachment, the process of dismemberment in his basement, the precise cuts, the careful packaging, all done with a perverse sense of efficiency. But the most disturbing aspect of his confession was his chilling account of how he blended the human flesh. He described it not as an act of savagery, but as a culinary technique, a gruesome innovation. He spoke of proportions, of textures, of how he had perfected the art of mixing human remains with ground beef, ensuring that the consistency and flavor profile would remain undetectable to even the most discerning palate. His voice, devoid of remorse, recounted how he processed the flesh, sometimes grinding it finely, other times incorporating it in a way that mimicked the marbling of conventional meat. The sheer audacity of his methods, turning his victims into the very product he sold to the public, was a testament to his profound pathology. He admitted to using his wife's remains in his burgers, just as he had done with previous, unknown victims, driven by the cold, pragmatic desire to erase all traces of his crimes and to keep his twisted business thriving. He revealed that the surge in sales during payday weekends had been a strategic opportunity, a time when the sheer volume of production provided the perfect cover for incorporating his grotesque ingredients. The terrifying logic was simple. The more burgers he sold, the more bodies he could dispose of without raising suspicion. His wife's threat, he reiterated, had merely accelerated an inevitable outcome. She had become another ingredient in his monstrous recipe for survival. With the confession in hand, the legal machine moved swiftly. The chef was formally arrested on multiple grave charges: first-degree murder for the premeditated killing of his wife, cannibalism for the consumption and incorporation of human flesh into food, and the sale of human meat, a charge almost unheard of in its horrific scope. The news of his arrest and the depraved nature of his crimes sent shockwaves far beyond California, gripping the nation in a mixture of horror and disbelief. The courtroom scenes that followed were a stark display of justice confronting unimaginable evil. The chef, now stripped of his professional guise, appeared in court, a figure of public disgust. The judge presided over the grim proceedings with a stoic gravity, the jury members listening intently, their faces etched with a mixture of revulsion and a deep sense of responsibility. Prosecutors laid out the overwhelming evidence, piece by painstaking piece, painting a devastating portrait of his crimes. They presented the forensic reports, played excerpts from his chilling confession, and brought forward the testimonies of investigators who had unearthed the unspeakable. His defense, meager and ultimately futile, struggled against the tide of irrefutable proof. The public, horrified and outraged, followed every detail of the trial, demanding accountability for such a profound betrayal of trust. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury, burdened by the weight of the monstrous truth, returned their verdict. It was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts. The final sentencing hearing delivered the full force of the law. The judge, his voice heavy with condemnation, pronounced the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, or, depending on the state's laws, the death penalty. The specific outcome, whether a lifetime behind bars or the ultimate forfeiture of his life, underscored the gravity of his crimes, ensuring that the California killer chef would never again inflict his brand of terror upon the unsuspecting. What if someone you trusted, someone who offered you a simple meal, sold you death on a bun?
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.